Princess Charlotte wasn't supposed to be in the West Corridor, not during afternoon events, not without her protection detail, and definitely not walking that quickly, with that look on her face. Sergeant Thomas Wright noticed her first. He'd been stationed near the blue drawing room for the past 2 hours, monitoring the afternoon reception from his designated post. Standard duty rotation, nothing unusual expected today. Just another Tuesday afternoon at Buckingham Palace, with minor royals attending a charitable foundation event. Guests were trickling in through the main entrance. Donors, board members, a few carefully selected members of the press capturing images for tomorrow's society pages. Wright had been scanning faces, checking credentials in his mind against the guest list he'd memorized that morning. Always the same routine, always the same careful attention to detail. That's what 6 years as a royal guard had taught him. Attention to detail could mean the difference between an uneventful afternoon and a security incident that made international headlines. Then he saw her, small figure in her school uniform, navy blue blazer with the school crest, pleated skirt, knee socks slightly askew, moving with purpose down the hallway that connected the private family quarters to the public reception areas. Something about the way she moved caught his attention immediately. Not running. Charlotte had been taught never to run in the palace corridors, taught that royal children moved with dignity and composure at all times, but walking fast. Too fast for someone who was supposed to be elsewhere. And she kept glancing behind her, quick, nervous looks over her shoulder every few steps. Wright's training kicked in automatically. Years of military service before joining the Royal Guard. Multiple deployments where reading situations correctly could save lives. He'd learned to trust his instincts in dangerous places, and right now every instinct he had was screaming that something was wrong with this picture. A 9-year-old princess shouldn't be walking these corridors alone during an official event. She should be with her protection officer, should be with her parents or another trusted adult, should definitely not be moving like she was trying to get away from something or someone. Wright stepped away from his post. Not far, just 3 steps to his right, enough to get a better angle on the corridor without abandoning his assigned position entirely. Charlotte had stopped near one of the tall windows that overlooked the palace gardens. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the glass, catching the dust particles in the air, making everything look peaceful and calm. But Charlotte's posture was anything but calm. She was looking back the way she'd come, and now Wright could see her face clearly. She wasn't crying. Royal children were taught not to cry in public spaces where staff might see. But she was close. Her jaw was set in that particular way children have when they're trying very hard not to let adults see they're upset. Her hands were clasped in front of her, fingers intertwined, knuckles white from pressure. Wright moved closer, quietly, deliberately. He didn't want to startle her, didn't want to add to whatever distress she was already experiencing. "Your Royal Highness?" His voice was gentle, pitched low so it wouldn't carry down the hallway. "Are you all right?" Charlotte turned quickly. For just a second, maybe less than a second, relief flashed across her young face. Then she controlled it, straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin slightly, tried to arrange her features into something composed and appropriate. She'd been taught that too. How to maintain royal dignity even when everything inside was falling apart. How to smile when cameras appeared. How to look calm when you were anything but. "I'm fine, thank you, Sergeant." Her voice was steady, polite, almost too steady, too controlled for a child her age. Wright had a daughter, 7 years old, younger than Charlotte, but not by much. He knew what "I'm fine" sounded like when it really meant, "I'm absolutely not fine, but I can't say so." He knew the particular quality of voice children used when they were holding back tears through sheer force of will. "Are you sure, ma'am? You seem upset." Charlotte opened her mouth to respond, probably to repeat that she was fine, that everything was perfectly all right. that he should return to his duties and not worry about her. Before she could speak, footsteps echoed from the corridor behind her. Not casual footsteps. Not the measured pace of someone strolling through the palace. Rapid footsteps. Purposeful. Angry. The young princess heard them too. Wright saw it in her body language. Shoulders tensing, hands gripping tighter. Slight backward step toward the window, as if she could somehow disappear into the sunlight and gardens beyond the glass. Queen Camilla appeared at the corridor intersection. Wright had seen the Queen Consort countless times during his years of service. Official state events, where she stood beside King Charles in formal regalia. Private functions where she moved through palace rooms with practiced grace. Coming and going from various wings of the palace, always impeccably dressed, always composed, always careful about appearances and proper protocol. The woman walking toward them now looked different. Her face was flushed, spots of colour high on her cheeks. Her movements were sharp, aggressive, lacking the usual measured quality. Her hands were clenched at her sides. She was angry, visibly, undeniably angry, and making no effort to hide it. "Charlotte." Camilla's voice cut through the quiet corridor like a blade. Sharp, cold, commanding. "I told you to stay put. We weren't finished with our conversation." Charlotte didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there by the window, trying to make herself smaller, without actually moving, trying to become invisible through sheer force of will. Wright stepped slightly to the side, not blocking anyone yet, not intervening, just positioning himself where he could see both of them clearly, where he could assess the situation properly. His training kicked in automatically. Identify all parties involved, assess potential threats, evaluate need for intervention, prepare multiple response options. His mind was cataloguing details rapidly. Charlotte's obvious fear, Camilla's visible anger, the mention of an unfinished conversation. The fact that Charlotte had clearly fled from that conversation. The young princess's current physical state, tense, frightened, trying to control her breathing. Something was very wrong here. "Your Majesty." Wright kept his voice neutral, respectful, giving nothing away. "Is everything all right?" Camilla's eyes flicked to him. Brief glance, dismissive. She wasn't used to guards questioning anything, wasn't used to having her movements or intentions examined. Guards were supposed to be invisible, silent, present but not present. They stood at posts and opened doors and maintained security perimeters. They did not ask questions. "This is a family matter, Sergeant." She didn't slow down, kept walking toward Charlotte with that same sharp, aggressive pace. "You can return to your post." But Wright didn't move. Because Charlotte had just done something that changed everything. Her hand moved. Small gesture, barely noticeable. So small that someone who wasn't watching closely, who wasn't trained to catch subtle signals, would have missed it entirely. Her right hand came up to her ear. Thumb touched her earlobe. 2 quick taps with her index finger. Deliberate. Precise. Then her eyes found his, held his gaze for just a moment. The signal. The emergency signal that Princess Catherine had taught her children. Wright felt everything in his body go still. Not frozen. Frozen implied panic, implied inability to act. This was different. This was ready. Coiled. Prepared to respond instantly. He'd seen that signal exactly once before, during the training briefing 6 months ago. Kate had called a meeting with all senior protection officers after a security scare at a public event. She'd explained the system she'd developed with her children. A simple, discreet signal they could use if they ever felt unsafe, if they ever needed help but couldn't ask for it verbally. The signal existed for exactly this kind of situation. When something was wrong, but the child couldn't speak freely. When asking for help out loud might make things worse. When they needed an adult to understand without words that they were in trouble. Charlotte had just used it on her own grandmother. "Your Majesty," Wright said, his voice still calm but with an edge of steel now, "I'm going to have to ask you to stop, right there." Camilla stopped. Not because she wanted to, not because she accepted his authority to give her instructions, but because the tone in his voice made it absolutely clear this wasn't a request, wasn't a suggestion, wasn't something she could brush aside and ignore. She turned fully toward him now. The expression on her face was pure ice. Shock mixed with outrage, mixed with disbelief. Guards didn't speak to her this way. Nobody spoke to the Queen Consort this way. "Excuse me?" The words came out clipped, precise, dangerous. "I need to ask what's happening here, Your Majesty." Wright kept his position, standing between Camilla and Charlotte now. Not aggressively positioned, not confrontationally, just there, present, a barrier if one became necessary. "What's happening?" Camilla said, each word sharp and precise like ice cracking, "is that I'm dealing with my step-granddaughter's behavior, which is absolutely none of your concern, Sergeant." Wright's mind was working rapidly. Protocol said royal family matters were internal, private, not subject to staff interference. Protocol said guards didn't get involved in family discussions or disagreements. Protocol said his job was to stand post and maintain security perimeters and not ask questions about what happened behind closed doors. But Protocol also said, very clearly, very explicitly, that if any member of the royal family used the emergency distress signal, everything else became secondary to ensuring their immediate safety. The signal overrode standard procedures. The signal meant danger. The signal meant act now. Charlotte had used the signal. "Princess Charlotte." Wright didn't take his eyes off Camilla, but he directed his words to the young girl standing behind him. "Are you all right? You can tell me the truth, whatever it is." Silence. Long enough that Wright could hear the grandfather clock at the end of the hallway, marking time. Tick, tick, tick. Could hear his own breathing. Could hear Camilla's breathing, faster than normal, angry. Then Charlotte's voice, quiet but clear. "She was yelling at me." Wright saw Camilla's expression change in real time. Surprise first, genuine shock that Charlotte had spoken up, had told someone outside the family what had happened. Then anger, deeper and colder than before. Then something calculating, something that looked like her mind working rapidly to control the narrative, to explain this in a way that made her look reasonable and Charlotte look like a difficult child. "I was not yelling," Camilla said, her voice suddenly smoother, more controlled, back to that practiced royal composure. "Charlotte is being dramatic. Children do that sometimes when they don't get their way. They exaggerate. They make mountains out of molehills." "She was yelling." Charlotte's voice was stronger now. Having someone believe her, having someone actually ask for her side of the story, seemed to give her courage she hadn't had before. "She was yelling because I wouldn't." "Charlotte," Camilla's voice cracked like a whip, sharp, full of warning. The kind of voice that said, "Be quiet right now or you'll regret it." "That's quite enough." The young princess flinched, actually physically flinched, small instinctive movement backward. And that movement, that small, involuntary reaction of a child who expected to be hurt or frightened by an adult's anger, told Wright everything he needed to know about this situation. He moved, not dramatically, not aggressively, just a half step to his right, directly in line between Camilla and Charlotte now. No longer standing adjacent, blocking, physically blocking the Queen Consort from approaching the princess. "Your Majesty, I'm going to need you to step back, please." Camilla stared at him, complete disbelief on her face. She looked like someone had just slapped her, like reality had twisted into something incomprehensible. "You're blocking me? You're actually physically blocking me?" "Yes, ma'am." Do you have any idea who I am? Yes, ma'am, I do. Wright's voice stayed level, professional, giving away nothing of the adrenaline coursing through his system. You're Queen Consort, and I also know that my primary duty is the safety and well-being of all members of the royal family, including Princess Charlotte. She's perfectly safe. She's with family. I'm her grandmother, for God's sake. Step-grandmother, Charlotte said quietly from behind Wright. So quiet he almost didn't hear it. But he did. And so did Camilla. The Queen's face flushed darker, angry red spreading across her cheeks, down her neck. She took a step forward, closing the distance between herself and Wright. He didn't move back, didn't move forward, just stood there, solid and immovable as the palace walls themselves. Sergeant Wright, Camilla's voice dropped lower, more dangerous, the kind of quiet that was more threatening than shouting. If you don't stand aside right now, immediately, I will have you removed from service. Not reassigned, removed, permanently. Your career will be over. Do you understand me? Wright's heart was pounding. He could feel it in his chest, in his throat, in his temples. 6 years of service at the palace. Years before that in the military, working his way up through ranks, earning commendations, building a reputation. His entire career, his livelihood, his future, everything he'd worked for, everything he'd built, all of it balanced on this single moment. Against that, a scared 9-year-old girl who'd used the emergency signal because she was frightened of her own grandmother. When he put it that way, there really wasn't a choice at all. You're welcome to do that, Your Majesty. That's your prerogative. But right now, in this moment, I need you to step back and explain to me what happened. What conversation were you having with Princess Charlotte that made her feel she needed to leave? But before we get into what happened next, make sure you hit that subscribe button on Crown Watch and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Now, back to the story. Camilla's hand trembled, slight movement. With rage, Wright thought. Pure rage at being defied, at being questioned, at having her authority challenged by someone she considered beneath her. She wasn't used to this. People didn't say no to the Queen. People didn't block her path. People didn't question her actions or demand explanations. She spoke, and others obeyed. That's how it had always worked. Until now. What happened, Camilla said through gritted teeth, each word forced out with visible effort at control, is that Charlotte was told to participate in the afternoon reception, to greet guests alongside the other grandchildren. Simple, basic royal duty, the kind of thing she's done 100 times before, and she refused, flatly refused. I didn't refuse, Charlotte said. Her voice was still quiet, but there was an edge to it now, something that sounded like the beginning of anger, mixing with her fear. I said I felt sick. I asked if I could please be excused to go lie down in my room. You were perfectly fine 10 minutes before that conversation. No, I wasn't. My stomach hurt. It hurt during lunch, and it got worse. I told you that. I told you I didn't feel well. You were trying to get out of your responsibilities, trying to avoid doing your duty. I was trying to tell you I was sick. Charlotte's voice rose, not to a shout. Not close to the volume Camilla had been using, but louder than Wright had ever heard her speak before, louder than was probably considered appropriate for a royal child addressing a senior member of the family. The young princess was shaking now. Wright could see it in her shoulders, in her hands, and he couldn't tell if it was from fear or anger, or both emotions colliding inside her small body. And that, Camilla said, gesturing at Charlotte with a sharp movement, is exactly the attitude I was addressing. The disrespect, the lack of proper royal bearing, the refusal to accept responsibility. That's what we were discussing. By yelling at her? Wright kept his voice neutral, carefully neutral, but the question hung in the air between them like smoke. I did not yell. She did. Charlotte was crying now. Not sobbing. Royal children were trained not to sob in front of staff, but quiet tears running down her face, dripping off her chin onto her school blazer. She grabbed my arm and pulled me out of the reception room because she said I was embarrassing her. She dragged me into the corridor and she started yelling that I was spoiled, that I was just like my mother, always making excuses, always thinking the rules didn't apply to me. She said I needed to learn what real duty meant, what real sacrifice looked like. Wright felt something cold and hard settle in his stomach. There it was. The real issue. This had nothing to do with Charlotte refusing duties. Nothing to do with a child feeling ill. This was about Catherine. About the ongoing tension between Camilla and Kate that everyone in the palace knew about but nobody discussed publicly. The resentment, the competition, the way Camilla sometimes seemed to view Kate as a threat rather than an ally, and Charlotte had gotten caught in the middle of it. "Your Majesty," Wright said carefully, choosing each word with precision. "Perhaps this conversation would be better continued somewhere private, with Princess Catherine present. I think this is a matter that should be discussed with her parents." "Catherine isn't here. She's at an engagement in Surrey. Won't be back until this evening." "Then perhaps we should wait until she returns, or contact Prince William." "We don't need William for this. We don't need Catherine. I'm perfectly capable of managing the situation myself. Charlotte needs to learn that she can't manipulate adults with complaints of feeling sick whenever she doesn't want to do something. She needs to understand that duty comes first. Always first. That's what being royal means." "The situation," a new voice said from behind them, cold and sharp as winter, "is already managed. And you're done here, Camilla." Everyone turned. Princess Anne stood at the corridor intersection, still in her riding clothes. Boots, breeches, casual jacket. She must have just returned from her afternoon ride on the estate grounds. Her hair was slightly windblown. There was colour in her cheeks from the exercise and fresh air. But her expression was anything but relaxed. Her face was carved from stone. Her eyes were cold as ice. And when Anne spoke in that particular tone, that precise combination of royal authority and military command, people listened, even queens. "Anne," Camilla said, visibly working to recover her composure. To shift from angry disciplinarian to reasonable adult being interrupted. "This doesn't concern you. This is a private family matter. My niece is standing in a corridor crying. My niece used the emergency distress signal that we implemented specifically for situations where she feels unsafe. And one of my guards felt it necessary to physically intervene between you and a child. I'd say it very much concerns me." Anne walked forward. Not quickly, not slowly, just with complete confidence and absolute authority. She moved like someone who'd spent her entire life in positions of command, who'd learned from birth that when she spoke, people obeyed, not because of titles, but because of who she was. When she reached Charlotte, she knelt down to the child's level, looked her directly in the eyes. "Charlotte, sweetheart, I need you to tell me exactly what happened. The truth, all of it, every detail. Don't worry about being polite or appropriate right now. Just tell me." And Charlotte did. The words came out in a rush now, all the control and composure breaking apart like a dam finally giving way. She told Anne everything, how she'd felt ill during lunch but hadn't wanted to complain because there were guests, how the nausea had gotten worse as the afternoon progressed, how she'd tried to participate in the reception but felt like she might actually throw up, how she'd finally worked up the courage to quietly approach Camilla and ask if she could please be excused to go lie down. "She said no," Charlotte continued, her voice shaking. "She said I was fine, that I was just being difficult. I asked again. I said I really didn't feel well. And that's when she grabbed my arm. Not hard enough to hurt. She didn't hurt me, I want to be clear about that. But she grabbed my arm and pulled me out into the corridor, away from the guests, away from everyone. And then she started yelling, not loud enough for people in the reception room to hear, but yelling at me. She said I was spoiled. She said Mum and Dad let me get away with too much. She said I needed to learn that being royal meant doing your duty even when you didn't feel like it. She said Mum was always making excuses about us kids needing privacy and normal childhoods, but that was nonsense. She said we were royal and we needed to act like it. Anne's expression hadn't changed, but Wright saw her jaw tighten, saw her hands clench briefly, then relax. What else? She said. Charlotte hesitated, looked down at her hands. She said Mum acted like she was special, like the rules were different for her just because people liked her. Camilla said Mum didn't understand what real duty meant because she hadn't grown up royal. She said Mum was teaching us bad habits, making us think we could pick and choose when to do our responsibilities. She said this about your mother, while yelling at you. Yes. Charlotte's voice was barely a whisper now. And I got upset. I started to cry a little, and that made her more angry. She said I needed to stop being dramatic, that I was proving her point about being spoiled. So I ran. I didn't know what else to do. I ran down the corridor, and that's when Sergeant Wright found me. Anne stood up slowly, very slowly. When she turned to face Camilla, her expression was absolutely glacial. You grabbed her arm. I guided her to a private location for a necessary conversation, which is what any responsible adult would do when a child is being difficult in public. She's 9 years old. She said she felt ill, repeatedly. The appropriate response is to check if she has a fever, give her some water, and call her mother to ask what she wants done. She was being manipulative. She's a child, Anne's voice rose. Just slightly. Just enough to cut through Camilla's attempt at justification. A 9-year-old child who said she didn't feel well. You had no right to drag her anywhere. You had no right to berate her about her mother. You had no right to use a child as a target for whatever resentment you're carrying about Catherine. And you certainly had no right to make her so frightened that she felt she needed to signal for help from a guard. Camilla's face went pale, then red, then pale again, emotions flickering across her features, too rapidly to track. Anne, you don't understand the full context of the situation. I understand perfectly. You overstepped. Badly. You let your personal feelings about Catherine cloud your judgment. You took those feelings out on her daughter. And thank God Sergeant Wright had the sense and the courage to intervene before it went any further. Wright stood very still. He hadn't expected this. Hadn't expected support. Hadn't expected validation. Guards who went against members of the royal family, even in the right circumstances, usually found themselves quietly reassigned to remote posts. At best, complete dismissal at worst. That's how the palace typically handled situations that might cause embarrassment if they became public. But Anne was publicly supporting his actions. Was saying explicitly that he'd done the right thing. Anne turned to him. Her expression softened slightly. Thank you, Sergeant Wright, for doing exactly what you're supposed to do. Protect members of this family when they need it. That takes courage, real courage, especially when the person they need protection from is another family member. Just doing my duty, ma'am, following protocol. Above and beyond protocol, I'd say. You could have looked the other way, pretended you didn't see Charlotte's signal, gone back to your post and let this be a family matter. Many guards would have. They'd have decided it wasn't their place to get involved. But you chose to stand between an upset adult and a frightened child. You chose to protect Charlotte even when it put your career at risk. That's not just duty. That's character. Anne looked back at Camilla. You need to leave, right now, before Catherine gets here and this situation becomes even worse than it already is. You can't order me to. I'm not ordering you to do anything, Camilla. I'm strongly suggesting, as someone who's been navigating palace politics since before you were born, that you put some distance between yourself and this situation. Because when William finds out about this, when Catherine finds out that you grabbed their daughter's arm, yelled at her about feeling sick, used her as a target for your resentment about her mother, you're going to want time to prepare for that conversation. Trust me on this. Camilla stared at Anne, then at Charlotte, then at Wright. Her expression cycled through emotions: anger, embarrassment, calculation, something that might have been fear. Finally, she turned and walked away. Quickly, not quite running, but close enough. Her footsteps echoed down the corridor, rapid and sharp against the polished floors. The silence she left behind felt heavy, oppressive. Anne put her hand gently on Charlotte's shoulder. "Come on, darling. Let's get you to the medical office. We need to check if you actually have a stomach bug, or if it was just stress making you feel ill. Either way, we're calling your mother right now." "Is Sergeant Wright going to get in trouble?" Charlotte looked up at Anne with red-rimmed eyes. "Because of me? Camilla said she'd have him fired." "No, sweetheart. Sergeant Wright is not going to get in trouble. What he did was exactly right. Camilla doesn't have the authority to fire guards. That's not how it works. And even if she did, Princess Anne, your father, and your mother would all prevent it. You have nothing to worry about." "Are you sure?" "I'm completely sure." Anne looked at Wright. "Walk with us, Sergeant. I want your full account of what you witnessed. Every detail. Times, exact words spoken. Everything." They moved through the corridors together, Anne with her hand on Charlotte's shoulder, the young princess walking close to her aunt's side, Wright following at a respectful distance. As they walked, Wright could hear Charlotte's quiet voice asking Anne more questions. "Is Camilla going to be angry with me? For telling? I don't know. Maybe. But that's not your problem to worry about. She said I was spoiled. She said I was like Mum in a bad way. There is no bad way to be like your mother. Catherine is one of the strongest, most dedicated members of this family. Anyone would be lucky to be like her. Camilla was wrong. Completely wrong. But what if she's right? What if I am spoiled? What if I should have just done the reception even though I felt sick? Charlotte, listen to me." Anne stopped walking, knelt down again to look the child in the eyes. "If you don't feel well, you have every right to say so. Being royal doesn't mean you stop being human. It doesn't mean you ignore what your body's telling you. If you felt sick, you should have been allowed to rest. That's not being spoiled. That's being sensible. Your mother is right to protect you and your brothers. Right to make sure you have normal childhoods as much as possible. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for that." They reached the medical office. The palace doctor, Dr. Sarah Morrison, who'd been caring for the royal family for over 15 years, took one look at Charlotte's tear-stained face and immediately ushered her into an examination room. Anne stayed with her. Wright waited outside. About 15 minutes later, Captain Richard Wells appeared. Senior Guard Commander, Wright's direct superior. The man who controlled his assignments, his evaluations, his entire career trajectory within the palace security apparatus. The expression on Wells's face was carefully neutral, unreadable, professional. "Sergeant Wright, we need to talk. Now." Here it comes, Wright thought. The reprimand, the investigation. The careful political maneuvering to determine whose career gets sacrificed to smooth over this incident. They moved to a small private office down the hallway. Wells closed the door behind them, gestured for Wright to sit, remained standing himself. "Tell me everything," Wells said, "start to finish. Leave absolutely nothing out. Every detail matters." So Wright told him. Everything. Charlotte's unusual presence in the corridor without her protection detail. The way she'd been moving, too fast, too purposeful, looking behind her repeatedly. His decision to approach and ask if she was all right. Camilla's appearance and obvious anger. The escalating tension. Charlotte using the emergency distress signal that Kate had taught the children. His decision to physically position himself between Camilla and Charlotte. The confrontation. Charlotte's testimony about what had happened. Anne's arrival and intervention. Every word, every movement, every decision point. When he finished, Wells was quiet for a long moment, just standing there, arms crossed, face still neutral, thinking. Then, "You recognize the emergency signal immediately?" "Yes, sir. Princess Catherine briefed all senior protection officers on it 6 months ago after the security incident at the museum event." "And you responded to that signal by physically blocking Queen Consort Camilla?" "I created a protective barrier between Her Majesty and Princess Charlotte, sir. Per protocol, when a minor member of the family uses the emergency distress signal indicating they feel unsafe." "Protocol." Wells nodded slowly. "Right, you followed protocol." "Yes, sir." "You understand this is going to cause significant problems?" "Yes, sir, I do." "The Queen's office has already been in contact. They want to know why one of our guards physically prevented Her Majesty from moving freely in her own residence. They're using words like insubordination and overreach of authority. There are people who want your head on a plate for this, right?" "I understand, sir. Do you?" Wells leaned forward, hands on the desk, looking directly at Wright. "Because this could end your career here. Could end it anywhere in royal service, honestly. Word spreads. Nobody wants a guard who they think will question royals or interfere in family matters. This could follow you for the rest of your professional life." Wright met his superior's eyes steadily. "Sir, if I had to do it again right now, knowing everything that might happen because of it, I'd make the exact same choice." Wells studied him for several long seconds. Then, unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth twitched. Almost a smile. Not quite, but close. "Good," Wells said quietly. "That's exactly the right answer. That's what I needed to hear." He straightened up, moved around the desk, sat down in the chair across from Wright instead of staying standing in a position of authority. "I'm opening a formal inquiry," Wells continued. "Standard procedure for any incident involving a royal family member and security intervention. It's unavoidable. Too many people know about it. Too many witnesses. You'll need to give a written statement. There will be interviews with palace administrators, probably someone from the King's private office. It'll be thorough and it'll be uncomfortable." "Yes, sir. But unofficially?" Wells lowered his voice. "Between us, as one soldier to another, you did exactly what you should have done. A child used the emergency signal. A child signaled that she felt unsafe. You responded appropriately to protect that child. That's the beginning and end of the story, as far as I'm concerned." Wright felt something in his chest unclench slightly. Just slightly. This wasn't over, wasn't close to over, but at least his direct commanding officer understood. "Thank you, sir. That means a lot." "Don't thank me yet. This isn't over. Not by a long shot." Wells opened a drawer, pulled out a folder, handed it to Wright. "This is for your formal written statement. I need every detail you can remember. Times, locations, exact quotes of what was said by whom, your observations of everyone's emotional state, physical positions, everything. The more thorough and detailed you are, the better your chances of coming out of this inquiry without career damage." Wright took the folder. "Princess Anne witnessed part of it, sir. Will she be giving a statement?" "Already did. Gave it about 10 minutes ago. Backs up everything you just told me, every detail." Wells paused. "She also made it very clear that she fully supports your actions. Called you courageous and professional in her statement. That carries weight, more weight than almost anyone else in the family when it comes to security matters." "And Princess Catherine?" "Being informed right now. She's cutting her engagement in Surrey short, heading back immediately. She'll want to talk to you. Be ready for that conversation. It won't be easy, but it won't be hostile either. Catherine's not angry at you. She's angry at the situation, angry that her daughter was put in a position where she felt she needed to use the emergency signal on a family member. Wells stood. Get that statement written. Make it detailed and factual. No emotion, no editorializing, just exactly what happened. I'll need it by end of day. Wright nodded, stood as well. Sir, one question. Go ahead. What's going to happen to Queen Camilla? Will there be any consequences for her? Wells's expression became carefully neutral again. That's being handled at the highest levels. King Charles, Prince William, Princess Catherine, closed-door discussions, not something you need to worry about, not your jurisdiction. Your job is to protect the family. You did that job. Let them handle family discipline. Wright left the office with the folder in hand, found another small empty office down the hall, sat down at the desk, opened the folder to find blank statement forms and a pen. He started writing, documented everything in precise, clinical detail, times as accurately as he could remember them, exact locations, West Corridor, near the third window from the blue drawing room, physical descriptions of everyone's positions, movements, emotional states, direct quotes wherever possible, approximate quotes where exact wording was uncertain. The act of writing it all down made it feel more real somehow, more concrete. He'd actually done this, actually blocked a queen to protect a princess, actually risked his entire career on a split-second judgment call, would do it again without hesitation. An hour and a half later, Wright was still working on the statement when someone knocked on the office door. He looked up. Princess Catherine stood in the doorway. She looked composed. That was the first thing Wright noticed. Everything about her posture, her expression, her carefully controlled breathing was composed and appropriate and royal. She was wearing the outfit she'd worn to the Surrey engagement. Elegant dress, practical shoes, minimal jewelry. Nothing about her appearance suggested anything was wrong, but her eyes told a different story. Her eyes were blazing with barely contained fury. Sergeant Wright, her voice was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that came from rigorous self-control. Wright stood immediately. Your Royal Highness, I understand you were with my daughter this afternoon, that you witnessed her encounter with Queen Camilla. Yes, ma'am. May I come in? Of course, ma'am, please. Wright gestured to the chair across from the desk. He remained standing until she sat, then sat down himself. Catherine looked at him for a long moment, assessing, evaluating, reading him the way he'd been taught to read situations and people. Then, I want you to tell me everything, not the formal report you're writing, the real version. What you saw, what you heard, what you felt, what made you decide to intervene the way you did. So Wright told her. For the third time today, he went through the entire sequence of events. But this time he included the parts he'd left out of his formal statement and his report to Captain Wells. The cold fear in his stomach when he'd seen Charlotte's distress signal. The split-second decision-making process, weighing protocol against a child's safety. The moment when he'd known, absolutely known, that this wasn't about Charlotte being difficult, but about Camilla taking out frustrations on a vulnerable target. He told Catherine about Charlotte's testimony, about Camilla's anger, about the things Camilla had said about Catherine herself, the accusations of spoiling the children, of making them think they were special, of not understanding real duty. When he finished, Catherine's carefully controlled expression hadn't changed. She still looked composed, still looked calm, but her hands were gripping the arms of the chair, hard enough that her knuckles had gone white. Charlotte gave the emergency signal, Catherine said. Her voice was steady, but tight. The signal I taught them. That we practiced together as a family. Yes, ma'am. The signal we created specifically for situations where they felt unsafe, where they couldn't ask for help verbally, where they needed an adult to understand without words that something was very wrong. Yes, ma'am. She used it on her step-grandmother. Catherine's voice cracked. Just slightly, just for a fraction of a second. Then she controlled it again, forced it back to steadiness. Her own step-grandmother made her so frightened, so desperate, that she had to signal a guard for help. Wright didn't know what to say, wasn't sure if she wanted him to say anything or if she was just processing, working through her emotions in the only way she could, by stating facts, by making the situation real through words. Step-grandmother, Wright said quietly. Charlotte made that distinction when Camilla called herself grandmother. She said step-grandmother, very specifically, very deliberately. I think she felt the distinction was important. Catherine looked up at him sharply. Something in her expression softened just slightly. She would. Charlotte's very particular about accuracy, about making sure things are described correctly. She took a slow breath. What else did she say? When you were with her? That she was scared, that Camilla grabbed her arm. Not hard enough to hurt. Charlotte was very clear about that, but grabbed her and pulled her into the corridor. That Camilla yelled at her about feeling sick, called her manipulative and spoiled, that she couldn't understand why Camilla was so angry just because she'd asked to go lie down. She really did feel ill. Dr. Morrison confirmed mild gastric distress when she examined her. Could be stress-induced, could be the beginning of a stomach bug. Either way, Charlotte was telling the truth about not feeling well. Catherine closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, they were wet with unshed tears that she refused to let fall. Thank you, she said quietly. Thank you for believing her, for taking her seriously, for not dismissing it as a child being difficult. She's a good kid, ma'am. Anyone who spends 10 seconds with her can see that. She's not manipulative. She's not dramatic. She's polite and responsible, and surprisingly mature for 9 years old. When a kid like that says something's wrong, something is wrong. You have children, Sergeant. A daughter, 7 years old. Then you understand. You understand what it's like to trust someone with your child, to believe they're safe, and then to find out that your child was frightened, that your child had to call for help because an adult you trusted was scaring them. Yes, ma'am, I understand that. Catherine was quiet for another long moment. Then, you physically blocked Queen Camilla. I created a protective barrier between Her Majesty and Princess Charlotte. Yes. You could be fired for that. Worse than fired. There are regulations about guards interfering with royals, about guards physically preventing any member of the family from moving freely. I'm aware of the potential consequences, ma'am. And you did it anyway. Princess Charlotte used the emergency distress signal. The protocol for responding to that signal is clear. Ensure the safety of the family member who signaled, regardless of other circumstances. That's what I did. I followed protocol. You did more than follow protocol, Sergeant. Catherine's voice was fierce now, intense. Your job description says stand at posts, monitor corridors, maintain perimeter security. Nowhere does it say stand between an angry adult and a frightened child at personal cost to yourself. That's not protocol. That's courage. That's choosing to do the right thing, even when the right thing might destroy your career. Wright didn't know how to respond to that. The formal inquiry will find no wrongdoing on your part, Catherine continued. Princess Anne, Captain Wells, and I will all provide statements supporting your actions. And if Queen Camilla's office wants to push the matter, if they want to claim you overstepped your authority, well, they'll need to explain why a 9-year-old child felt frightened enough to use an emergency signal designed for genuine threats. What will happen to Her Majesty? To Queen Camilla? Catherine's expression went cold, absolutely glacial. That's being discussed. Right now. Charles, William, and I are having a conversation about appropriate boundaries and consequences. But I can tell you this much. It won't happen again. My children will not be subjected to that kind of treatment. Not from anyone. Not from staff. Not from security. And certainly not from family. She stood. Wright stood as well. Charlotte asked about you, Catherine said, when I went to the medical office to see her. She wanted to know if you were all right, if you were going to get in trouble because of her. She shouldn't worry about that. I told her the same thing, but she insisted that I come see you personally, to make sure, to thank you. Catherine's voice softened. She said you were brave, that you weren't scared even when Camilla was yelling, that she wants to be like that when she grows up. Brave enough to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. Wright felt something tight in his throat. She's already brave, Ma'am. She stood there and told the truth, even though she was frightened. That takes real courage. It does. Catherine moved toward the door, then paused, turned back. You're being moved to close protection detail, effective immediately after this inquiry concludes. Personal security for my family during official engagements. That's a promotion, increase in rank and pay. You'll be working directly with Williams and my detail team. Wright stared at her. Ma'am, I don't know what to say. Say you'll continue doing exactly what you did today. Say you'll keep choosing to protect my children, not just from external threats, but from anyone who might hurt them. Because that's what I need. That's what they need. Guards who understand that the priority is keeping them safe, not maintaining palace politics, not avoiding difficult situations, keeping them safe, period. Yes, ma'am, I will, I promise. Then that's all I need to hear. Catherine opened the door. Finish your statement. Take the rest of today off. You've earned it. Report to Captain Wells tomorrow morning for your new assignment briefing. She left. The office felt very quiet after she was gone. Wright sat back down at the desk, looked at the partially completed statement in front of him, thought about the last 3 hours, the frightened child, the angry adult, the split-second decision, the potential consequences, the actual outcomes. He'd thought he might lose his career. Instead, he'd earned a promotion. The formal inquiry concluded 2 days later. Wright had given his detailed written statement, answered questions from palace administrators, sat through an interview with someone from King Charles's private office who asked the same questions 5 different ways, trying to determine if there had been any political motivation, any bias, any reason beyond simple response to protocol. So to be absolutely clear, the administrator had asked, you intervened solely because Princess Charlotte used the emergency distress signal? That's your only reason? That's the primary reason, yes, sir. The signal indicates immediate need for protection. Protocol requires response. But you also mentioned in your statement that Princess Charlotte appeared frightened, that Queen Camilla appeared angry. Those are subjective assessments. Respectfully, sir, reading body language and emotional states is part of security work. I'm trained to assess potential threats. Part of that assessment includes evaluating people's emotional states. Charlotte was demonstrably distressed. Tears, shaking hands, elevated breathing rate. Camilla was demonstrably angry. Flushed face, aggressive movement, sharp tone. Those aren't subjective opinions. Those are observable facts. And you felt the situation warranted physical intervention? I felt the situation warranted creating a protective barrier between an upset adult and a distressed child who had signaled for help. Yes, sir. Even though that adult was Queen Consort? The protocol doesn't include exceptions based on rank, sir. When a family member uses the distress signal, we respond. That's the entire point of having the signal. The inquiry found no wrongdoing. Official letter from the Guard Commander's office. Sergeant Thomas Wright had acted appropriately and in accordance with established security protocols when responding to Princess Charlotte's distress signal. His actions were professional and warranted given the circumstances. Unofficial message from Captain Wells. Stop making my job interesting. I prefer boring. What happened next shocked everyone who witnessed it. But first, drop a comment and let us know. Would you have done the same thing in his position? Now, here's what the guard discovered. The real changes happened quietly over the following weeks and months. Not with dramatic announcements, not with press releases, not with official palace statements. That wasn't how the royal family handled internal matters. They adjusted, they adapted, they made subtle shifts that only people who worked closely with them would notice. But the shifts were significant. Queen Camilla's schedule was restructured, nothing dramatic, nothing that would raise questions from the press. But her afternoon duties changed. Her involvement with certain charitable organizations adjusted. Her presence at family events, where the younger grandchildren attended, became more selective. She still saw George, Charlotte, and Louis, still appeared in family photos at official occasions, still maintained her role as step-grandmother in public. But private interactions became different, structured, supervised. She no longer appeared at casual family gatherings without William and Catherine present. No more afternoons alone with the grandchildren. No more spontaneous visits to their residence. No more private conversations in palace corridors without other adults present. Nobody made an official announcement about these changes, but everyone in the palace noticed. Staff whispered about it over tea breaks. Guards discussed it during shift changes. Everyone knew something fundamental had changed, even if the specific details of what happened that afternoon in the West Corridor remained officially confidential. Wright heard through the palace grapevine that there had been a meeting, a long, intense, uncomfortable meeting. King Charles, Prince William, Princess Catherine, behind closed doors in Charles's private office. 2.5 hours, voices raised at multiple points, particularly William's. The Prince of Wales had been direct, Wright heard. Brutally direct. No diplomatic language, no careful royal phrasing. Just a father protecting his children, making it absolutely clear that if Charlotte ever felt frightened enough to use the emergency signal again because of Camilla, there would be serious consequences. Not vague consequences, specific ones, like William removing his entire family from royal duties. Like public statements about why, like situations Charles definitely did not want to deal with. Whatever was said in that meeting, whatever agreements were reached, whatever ultimatums were issued, it worked. Camilla was careful after that, polite, formal, correct in all her interactions with William's children. But the warmth she'd sometimes displayed, or pretended to display, was gone. She was cordial when she saw them, appropriate, but distant. The family tolerated it. Charlotte, George, and Louis had their real grandmother in Carol Middleton. They had close relationships with Catherine's family. They didn't need Camilla to be warm. They needed her to be safe. And now she was. Wright began his new position 3 weeks after the incident. Close protection detail for the Cambridge family. It meant different hours, different duties, different types of events. Instead of standing static posts, monitoring corridors, he travelled with the family to official engagements, stood close during public appearances, assessed threats in real time, managed security perimeters at dynamic locations. He saw Charlotte at an official event about a month after everything happened, a garden party at one of the smaller royal residences, relatively informal by royal standards, but still requiring full protocol and security. Charlotte was there with her parents and brothers, wearing a bright yellow dress that made her look even younger than 9 years old. She was maintaining perfect royal composure, smiling at the right times, waving to guests, standing with excellent posture. But Wright noticed something different about her, a watchfulness that hadn't been there before. She stayed closer to her parents than she used to, closer to Kate especially, and when people approached to speak to the family, Charlotte's eyes would track them carefully, assessing before she relaxed. She'd learned something that afternoon in the corridor, something children shouldn't have to learn. She'd learned that even people with titles and authority could make you feel scared. That family didn't automatically mean safe, that adults could hurt you with words even if they never touched you. But she'd also learned something else. She'd learned that there were adults who would stand up for you, who would put themselves at risk to keep you protected, who would choose to help even when helping was difficult. When Charlotte saw Wright across the garden, she whispered something to Catherine. Her mother nodded. Charlotte walked over, proper and formal, but with clear purpose. Hello, Sergeant Wright. Your Royal Highness. Wright gave a small bow. I wanted to say thank you properly. I never got to, for that day. You don't need to thank me, ma'am. I was just following protocol. No. Charlotte's voice was quiet but firm, adult beyond her years. No, you weren't just following protocol. Following protocol would have been going back to your post, letting it be a family matter, deciding it wasn't your problem. You chose to help me instead. That's different. That's important. Wright didn't know how to respond to a 9-year-old speaking with such clarity and insight. Mummy says you're working with our family now, that you'll be at more events with us. Yes, ma'am, if that's all right with you. It's very all right. Charlotte's small face was serious. It makes me feel safer, knowing you're there, knowing that if something ever happens again, not the same thing, but anything, you'd help. I would, always. That's a promise. Charlotte smiled then, genuine smile that reached her eyes. Good, that's what I thought. She glanced back to where Kate and William were speaking with some guests. I should go, but thank you, Sergeant Wright. Really. Before Wright could respond, Prince William appeared. The Prince of Wales looked at his daughter, then at Wright, and something passed between them. An understanding, an acknowledgement, a moment of complete clarity. Sergeant Wright, good to have you on the team. Truly. Thank you, sir. Honoured to serve. William put his hand on Charlotte's shoulder. Come on, darling. We need to speak with the Lord Mayor. Charlotte nodded, gave Wright one more smile, and walked away with her father. Wright watched them go. Father protecting daughter, daughter trusting father. The way it should be. That's what mattered. The incident was never discussed publicly, never appeared in any press reports, never became a scandal or a story. The palace was very good at controlling narratives, at keeping internal matters internal. But it changed things nonetheless. Changed protocols, changed relationships, changed the way security approached situations where children might feel unsafe, even from family members. 3 months after everything happened, Wright was standing post at a formal dinner when Princess Anne approached him during a break between courses. Sergeant Wright, and how are you finding the new position? Very well, ma'am. Thank you for asking. Good. You've earned it. Anne paused, looked at him directly. What you did that day in the corridor, that took character, real character. It's easy to be brave when everyone will praise you for it. It's much harder when being brave might cost you everything. I did what needed to be done, ma'am. Exactly. That's what makes it remarkable. You saw what needed to be done and you did it. No hesitation, no calculation of personal cost. Just immediate action to protect a child. Anne's expression softened slightly. Charlotte talks about you sometimes. Did you know that? She tells her brothers that if they're ever scared or in trouble, they should find Sergeant Wright, that you're the guard who helps even when it's hard. Wright felt that tightness in his throat again. She shouldn't have had to go through any of it, ma'am. No, she shouldn't have, but she did. And because of you, it didn't become something worse. You stopped it from escalating. You gave her a safe adult to trust when she felt she had nowhere to turn. Anne nodded once, formal and final. Well done, Sergeant. My mother would have been proud. I certainly am. She walked away before Wright could respond. Months became a year. Wright continued his work with the Cambridge Family Security Detail, travelled with them to official engagements, stood nearby during public appearances, maintained security perimeters, did his job professionally and quietly, and sometimes, at events where Charlotte was present, she'd catch his eye, give him a small nod, a quiet acknowledgement of the bond they shared, protector and protected, guard and princess. Adult, who'd made the right choice, and child who'd been brave enough to ask for help. Wright thought about that afternoon often. The fear in Charlotte's eyes, the emergency signal, the split-second decision to stand between a frightened child and an angry adult, the consequences he'd expected versus the consequences that actually came. He'd thought it might destroy his career. Instead, it had defined it, had shown him what the uniform really meant, beyond standing at posts and following standard procedures. It meant being worthy of a child's trust. It meant choosing right over easy. It meant protecting people who needed protection, regardless of who that protection was needed from. Wright understood that now, understood it in a way that went beyond training and protocol and military discipline. The uniform didn't make him a guard. The choices did, and he'd made the right one. Looking back, years later, Wright would remember that afternoon in the West Corridor as the moment everything changed, not just for him professionally, but in how he understood his role, how he understood duty. Duty wasn't blind obedience to rules and ranks. Duty was knowing when the rules mattered less than the person right in front of you needing help. Charlotte would grow up, would go to university, pursue her own interests, forge her own path. She'd remember that afternoon differently than Wright did, through a child's eyes, with a child's understanding. But she'd remember one thing clearly. When she'd been frightened and needed help, someone had been there. Someone had chosen to protect her even when it was difficult. That mattered. That shaped how she'd see the world. How she'd understand what adults owed to children. How she'd recognize that true courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about acting despite fear. And Wright would carry it with him too. That moment of choice. That split-second decision that duty to a frightened child mattered more than protocol with a queen. He'd made the right call. He'd do it again, every single time. Because that's what the uniform really meant. It's a reminder that true duty isn't about following orders blindly. It's about knowing when the rules matter less than doing what's right. The uniform doesn't make someone a hero. The choices do. And on that afternoon in the West Corridor, Sergeant Thomas Wright made the choice that mattered, protecting a child who needed protection, regardless of who that protection was needed from. Sometimes courage means standing between power and vulnerability, even when standing there might cost you everything. If this story showed you something about the Royal Guards you didn't know before, make sure you're subscribed to Crown Watch. We share these untold stories from inside the palace every single day. Tomorrow's story is even more shocking. A royal guard discovers documents in Camilla's private office that reveal a plan to undermine William and Catherine. The lengths he goes to expose the truth will leave you speechless. Drop a comment below and let us know. Have you ever had to stand up to someone in authority to protect someone more vulnerable? What happened? How did you find the courage to act? We'll see you in the next one.